Daniel chapter 2 opens up with Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, tossing and turning in his bed. So he had been laying there thinking about his great empire, and then he started thinking about the future. What's going to happen next? When is this all going to end? And now over 2,500 years later, we still wonder the same thing. What's going to happen next? When is it all going to end? And so we don't have to wonder anymore, because God gave us the answer when he revealed the answer to Nebuchadnezzar here in chapter 2. So Nebuchadnezzar couldn't sleep. His spirit was troubled. He wanted to know what this dream meant. So he called together the magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, Chaldeans, which were the wise men of Babylon, and he said, I have dreamed a dream, and I want to know what it means. And then in verse 4, it says, Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac. So right here in this verse, there is a switch in the language that the book was written in. So chapters 1 through chapter 2, verse 3 was written in Hebrew. Then in verse 4 through chapter 7, it was written in Aramaic, which was the Babylonian language. And so this is so significant because it shows that now God is speaking to the world. He's speaking to the Gentiles. So aren't you thankful that God spoke to us Gentiles too? Aren't you thankful that God sent his son into the world for us Gentiles too? And when he was born, that old man Simeon took him up in his arms in the temple. And he said, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, for mine eyes have seen thy salvation, a light to lighten the Gentiles, and the glory of thy people Israel. So his wise men, they said, okay, just tell us the dream, we'll tell you what it means. He said, I forgot. He said, the dream has left me. And so he said, but if you don't tell me what it was and what it means, you will be cut into pieces, and your houses will be made a dunghill. So now they're shaking in their sandals. And so they go back and forth, and they finally said, we cannot tell you this. There's not a man on earth that can tell you this. And so this is relevant for today because there's so many people today with questions, but they're going to the wrong people for answers. They're going to lawyers, therapists, professors, and they will not come to God, who has all the answers. But Nebuchadnezzar, he was so mad, he commanded for all the wise men of Babylon to be killed. So this would include Daniel and his friends. But God had a plan. He was first going to expose those wise men of Babylon for the false prophets they were and exalt his true prophet. So Daniel goes in and asks the king, he said, just give me some time. I'll tell you your dream. I'll show you what it means. So Daniel was so confident because he had a great faith in God that God would reveal it to him. So he went back and he asked his friends to pray. So isn't it good to know people that can and will pray? A couple weeks ago, this old preacher come in the pharmacy. He said, come out here. I got something to tell you. I said, okay. He said, I was at my doctor's office the other day. He said, a nurse came in. She said, preacher, I got something for you to pray about. He said, okay, what is it? She said, I got a little one that's sick. He said, I can't hear good, but from my understanding, I thought it was her daughter's baby. He said, she went out of the room. He said, I started praying, Lord, touch this child. Lord, help this sick child. He said, I was really getting the prayers through. He said, she come back in, and she said, preacher, don't forget me now. He said, oh, don't worry, I'd already been praying. She said, well, let me show you it. He said, it was a goat. But so these boys, they got prayers through. They got prayers through to the God of heaven. Look at verse 19. It says, then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night of vision. So God answered his prayer. He showed him the dream. And then it said Daniel, he blessed the God of heaven. He didn't run straight to the king. He stopped and he praised God. So we see Daniel, he's a man of purpose. He's a man of prayer. He's a man of praise. And we're about to see that he is a man of prophecy. So he goes to the king. He says the secret that the king wanted to know, your wise men, your magicians, your astrologers, they cannot show you. He said, but don't worry. Verse 28, he said, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets. He said, you were wondering what's going to happen, and he showed you. He said, this was your dream. Verse 31, he said, thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image whose brightness was excellent stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. So it was this great statue, and it was awesome. It was awe-inspiring. And one of the most remarkable things about this statue is it was made out of different metals. The head of gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and feet part iron and part clay. And he says, you, O king, you are this head of gold. And then verse 39 and 40, he said, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. So Nebuchadnezzar was looking at this image, and then all of a sudden he sees a stone cut out without hands, out of the mountain. And it comes down, it smites the image on the feet, busts the feet, and busts the iron and clay into pieces. And then it said the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold were all bust into pieces and blew away like the chaff. And it said there was no more place found for them anymore. So each of these metals, they represent a world empire that would rule the world. And so there have only ever been 4 world empires. The first one, represented by the head of gold, we know was the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar. And then looking back on history, we know the next empire was the Media and Persian Empire. God represented it by 2 arms because it was a dual empire, Media and Persia. Then the third world empire was the Grecian Empire under one of the greatest ancient generals, Alexander the Great. He conquered the known world, and his soldiers wore armor made out of brass. And brass is inferior to silver, and so was his empire in wealth, extent, and duration. And then the fourth empire was the Roman Empire. And so this proves that the Bible is true and that God is real, that he foretold this long before they ever come into existence, and it all happened. That's why Daniel is attacked so much, because people don't want to believe that God predicted and foretold the future. And then the fourth empire, the Roman Empire, is divided. He represented it with 2 legs. Roman Empire was divided into 2 sections, the eastern and western divisions, made out of iron, and they were known for their iron rule, their ability to crush all resistance with an iron heel. And now for the feet of part iron and part clay. So we know that no outside enemy destroyed Rome. It fell apart from the inside. And as a visible empire, it does not exist today, but it is still alive today in those nations. Its laws live on, its language, its warlike spirit lives on. In the Roman Empire, there were many that came through history that tried to put it together again, like Charlemagne, Napoleon, Hitler, Mussolini, but there is a man coming that's going to do it, and that is the man of sin. The last Roman emperor, the last gentile ruler, is going to be the Antichrist. So the Roman Empire is going to be revived in a visible form, and the Bible tells us it was going to be partly strong, partly broken. There will be a mingling, but not a mixing like iron and clay. It will have the strength of iron, but no cohesion. And then 10 feet, it will be made of 10 kingdoms whose 10 toes, but made of 10 kingdoms whose 10 kings will give their power to the Antichrist, who will lead an army against Jerusalem, which brings us to the climax of the dream, the stone. So who is that stone? So it's none other than Jesus. We see that taught throughout the entirety of the scriptures. Jesus is the stone. He is the spiritual rock that was pierced at Calvary. Like Moses struck the rock and water came out, he was struck and blood and water came out. So that was the first time he came. But the second time, he is coming to judge. So that stone, it didn't hit the image multiple times. But with one blow, it came and destroyed the entire image, and its remains were blown away. So it said all the metals were broken with that one blow. So how could he destroy all these 4 when they existed a long time ago? So it's because some of each empire was incorporated into its successor. And in that last empire, the Antichrist Empire, there will be part of all 4 of these in it. And so Jesus is going to come and destroy them all. And then he's going to set up a kingdom. So verse 44, it says, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. So the Babylonian kingdom was left to the Medes and Persians, it was left to the Greeks, left to the Romans, but his kingdom will not be left to anyone, because he will rule and reign forever. It says, it shall stand forever. And he's coming supernaturally. It was a stone cut out without hands. So man can make brick, concrete, steel, but only God can make a stone. So he's coming. There will be no election. Nobody will vote for him, but God will set him up as king. Psalm 2:6 says, yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. So when Nebuchadnezzar heard this, he must have been so overwhelmed. He fell on his face. He worshipped Daniel like Daniel was a god. He elevated him up to be ruler over the whole province of Babylon, made him chief of the governors over the wise men, and he made Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So what did this dream mean for Daniel and the Hebrew captives? So God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that Israel was his covenant nation. that the land, the promised land, will be theirs and their descendants forever. He promised David that his throne will be established forever. He promised them that the Messiah was coming to set up a kingdom that would never end. But look at them now. The entire nation is taken into captivity. Their temple is burned down. They have no king. The land is a total desolation. So they might have started wondering, has God forgotten his promises? Has God broken? Will he break his covenant he made with our fathers? They might have wondered, is he done with the nation of Israel? But God gave them the answer in this dream. He has not forgotten his promises. He has not broken his covenant. He was going to bring them back to their land, and he was going to send one that would sit on the throne of his father David and reign forever. So what does this dream mean for the world today? So the viewpoint of today is the world is getting better and better. Everybody thinks we're the most superior. We have the best form of government, but that is not true. We see in this statue, each kingdom that came was inferior, shown by the diminishing value of the metals. Gold is the most valuable metal, and then it decreases down to clay. And the weight of the image, the metals, declines. So gold has the highest specific gravity, and it decreases until you get to clay. So this image is top heavy, and it stands on a weak foundation, a mixture of mud. And so the forms of government also become weaker. We start out with an absolute monarchy, and then they get weaker as they go down. The first one was a single empire, then a dual empire, then the third one, Alexander left it. It was divided up into four among his four generals. Rome was divided into two, and it will eventually be divided into 10. So the details of this image show us that as we move toward the feet, the world is getting worse and worse, weaker and weaker. And as time goes on, we don't see things getting better. We see degeneration and devaluation as human government stands on a weak foundation. And as long as government is in the hands of man, it will be wickedness, war, and deterioration. But the good news is, the stone is coming. When he came the first time, he didn't destroy the Roman Empire. He allowed them to crucify him. But he's coming again, not in a manger, but he's coming on a white horse, and he's coming as the stone, and he will grind all enemies to powder. So long ago in the book of Genesis, God said that the scepter, the rule, would come into the tribe of Judah. And it did when that little shepherd boy was anointed king. And then that scepter was passed on down through the line of David. But then one day, God took that scepter out of the Jewish hands, and he laid it down, and he gave rule to the Gentiles, the Gentile world powers. But one day, God is going to take it up again, and he's going to place it in those nail-pierced hands. So the stone is coming. We either come to the stone, or the stone is coming to you.